urban survival rifles. You're in the urban jungle, baby. Welcome to Gunfighter Life, where we talk about guns, gunfighting, tactics, survival, ethics, the right way with Almighty God at the center, Judeo-Christian values. On that, first and foremost, I am a Christian. It's number one in everything that I do. Also, a little bit of a tailored bio to today's show. Now, I live in northern Idaho, not far from the Canadian border, not far from Montana. About as far from the rat race physically as I can get. But you might know from the bio, I've spent a lot of time in urban environments. So LAPD. I worked regular assignments, also worked fugitive recovery. A professional door kicker. Literally, hunting men. Manhunting is may not be politically correct, but what else would you call fugitive recovery? Also, after my combat tours in Iraq, which were both urban and more natural environments, I was an urban warfare instructor for the United States Marine Corps under Mojave Viper. I was also a private contractor for a 3-letter government agency I won't specify. I also was the commander of a tactical team here, CONUS, in the United States, in a large metropolitan area to stop active shooters. That was the reason we existed, to stop active shooters on American soil. That was our bread and butter. So I should mention briefly, I joined the Marine Corps pre 9/11. I was in Kuwait waiting for the war to start, and I was blessed to be part of a little bit. Anyway, I'm gonna leave what I was a part of, but I got to see Baghdad before collapse, during collapse, and post collapse. I was there. I've got to see, and it was. You might think of it as a third world country, but at the time it was a nice modern city, Baghdad. What it's become may be something completely different. But I got to see a modern functioning city descend into chaos, descend into a sad, war-torn, terrorist state taken over, let's say, failed state. Now, I am not going to bury the lead here. Probably your best option is going to be America's favorite rifle, right? The AR-15. It's probably, I'm not going to bury the lead here either. If I'm giving a recommendation for an all-around M-forgery, why not get a really good option that's been a standard for a long time? My number one recommendation, get a Colt 6920. They're not cheap. They're not overly expensive either. You still get Colt 6920s. I just got a in-stock alert. I don't know if they'll still be in stock when you listen to this, but from Brownells, and they have the entire rifle. Again, they're not a budget rifle, but they're not overly expensive. The Colt, I'm not a Colt fanboy or anything, but they're the standard. They make high-quality stuff. If you want a generation-lasting M4 and not some question mark as to maybe it's really good and it's a good value, maybe it's going to crap the bed a year into the chocolate hitting the fan. You want and any mechanical device can fail, but you want a pretty good recommendation? Colt 6920. M4. It's as close to a real M4 minus the full auto, which is rarely used, as anything else. That's going to be your standard. That's going to be your baseline urban survival rifle. I like a Truco Witness, a good quality red dot. When I say red dot, I mean that generically, like it could be a green triangle. That's one of my favorites. I like something that will function without batteries. And I like a good backup iron sight system. I like a good sling and a good white light. Listen to me there, men. That does not mean if you get said rifle that you are a gunfighter, any more than it means that if I get a Fender Stratocaster or a whatever, I don't know, right? I'm not a rock star. This is kind of the point of this. If you give me Jimi Hendrix's guitar, that's not going to make me Jimi Hendrix. If I give you that exact same setup that I just talked about, that's not going to make you a gunfighter. Especially urban warfare. Urban warfare, room clearing, things like that, that's a thinking man's game. That's like chess that will kill you if you lose. As somebody that's been an urban warfare instructor and been on the wrong end of gunfire, on let's just say, I don't like to talk specifically about my bio, actual situations, but it's a thinking man's game. It's like chess where if you lose, you're dead. or gravely injured, or your buddy is dead. So do not think that if you get that rifle, you've checked that box and now you can go back to looking at something else on Amazon and eating Cheetos and drinking Diet Coke. And because you've seen Red Dawn and John Wick, you're pretty much legit. Right? That's not how that works. But getting back to so please get some proficiency, get some training. This will either come out before or after. I'm still doing quite a bit of work on it. A Modern Rifleman's Course of Fire. This is meant to develop, sharpen, and maintain rifleman skills for a modern rifleman. This is not meant to replace actual training. What I would hope is you go get a good, legit basic rifle class and then a tactics class, because this course will not really teach you tactics, but it's a DIY, affordable everyman's rifleman training that I'm really putting a lot of work into, and it's still not yet complete. The episode is recorded, but many of the other things that go into it are not yet completed. There's a lot more that goes on behind the mic than me just talking, just orating. That's very two-dimensional. But get the training. And once you have a basic understanding of the fundamentals and of kind of urban conflict, urban interpersonal struggle for resources, however you want to put that, this rifleman, this DIY rifleman training hopefully will be a good addition to that. And pretty much any modern practical rifle you can complete this course with. I designed it that way. I designed this whether you want to run it as training or a qualification. If you're doing like running a church security service or something, it's designed that you can shoot it with pretty much all modern practical rifles. And that's a whole other episode that I recorded for the patrons on what is a modern practical rifle. But getting back to this, the M4, the Colt 6920, or whatever other brand, if you have one that you think is just as good or better, like a Daniel Defense or a BCM or whatever the case is, right? Done plenty of episodes on just the AR. Why would you not go with an M4 approximation? When would that not be the right choice? Well, a big one is malum prohibitum, right? It's prohibited by law. You want to train and proficient. You want to be trained and proficient before the event, right? Left of peanut butter and chocolate hitting the fan. You want to be a well-versed rifleman. You, I guess, could in one of these places have it in parts and pieces in a gun safe or whatever for a rainy day when the laws don't apply, but you're not going to be very good with it. I'd rather you have something less optimal on paper, but that you are proficient with. That's a way bigger variable. You being proficient with your gun is a way bigger variable than the capacity of the weapon or this other thing that we like to nerd out about. You being proficient with the weapon is, right, that gun's not going to do anything, despite what some, hoplophobiacs might think. The gun is not going to hurt anything, is not going to inflict any damage just sitting there. You have to put it into action. I'd rather have you be well trained with a gun that you're proficient with. And in many places, due to malum prohibitum, due to laws and legislation that are, let's just say, infringy, you can't have that. So, how about a big one? How about an SKS? Now, hold on. I am not saying that the SKS is as good a modern battlefield rifle or an urban warfare rifle as an M4. I didn't say that. Did you hear me say that? What I'm saying is if you cannot have an M4, but you can have an SKS because it's not a removable box magazine, and don't try and Bubba-ize it and turn it into one. Leave it the way that it is. It's good the way that it is. It's a good intermediate cartridge, 7.62x39, which you might argue round for round is a better cartridge. Internal magazine, and it's legal in many places, Canada, where an M4 is not legal. Or you have to do some kind of abomination thing to make an M4 legal, like California. Perhaps you're better with an unadulterated functioning, and I say perhaps, you're better with an unadulterated functioning SKS than some abomination that vaguely resembles an M4 that works half the time. So in those environments, the SKS might be a viable option. Again, your skill with it is a bigger variable. Also, perhaps it's what you have. as much as we like guns, there's a lot more that goes into preparedness than just guns. So if you already have an SKS, for the time being, rock on. Let's move on to another thing, why you may not want to go with an M4. This is urban survival rifles, not urban warfare rifles. And again, we already talked about the M4. What if, and this is a lot of people's plan, what if your plan is to bug out? Your plan is to get out of that people hive. Here, I should do a whole episode on this. Maybe it'll go out on Alpha Male Podcast. Just did one on urban fieldcraft. But survival math, right? If you know anything about living off the land, and I'd like to think that I know a little bit, I'm blessed to do a lot of our diet on foraging and hunting and fishing. And I've done that ever since I was a young boy. There's been obviously pauses in that when I was fighting war or LAPD. But a very large portion of our current meat ration, it comes from me hunting a field. And again, this probably should be its own episode, but do some real simple survival math. What is the carrying capacity of where you live? And you can even include in that the hinterlands if you like. If you live in a suburb and you want to include the slightly extended hinterlands, your immediate area, what can that land sustain as far as people go? What is the carrying capacity of that land? Keep in mind, a lot of agriculture, if you live in an agriculture area like the Midwest, much of that is dependent largely, you should know this if this applies in your area, but largely on chemical fertilizer, which probably is not going to be a thing, right of peanut butter and chocolate hitting the fan. Also, largely based on irrigation, which is probably not going to be a thing unless you live in one of the small places where irrigation is gravity fed. You got to pump that, which requires fossil fuel, which again may not be a thing right of bang. So although you may think there's a lot of food around, very shortly there probably won't be. So real quick survival math, how many people live per square mile where you live? How far do you have to travel before you get to an area where that number swings the other way, where that land, where the amount of people that live in the area is less than that land can support? Because you're adding to that. Right? My wife's family lives in Florida, in Central Florida. And the state of Florida, you might think, oh, great for survival. There's even, I won't get into that, but people that think they're serious about, I'm not going to get it. I'm going to leave it. I looked up when I was there. The population density of Florida is 400. It's over 400 people per square mile. What's the carrying capacity of 1 square mile of the best of Florida land? I bet you it's not 400. It's not over 400 people. So anyway, you live in any kind of those what I would call people hives, where the population density exceeds the carrying capacity of that land. Simple math. Get out. Get out. And if you don't get out left of peanut butter and chocolate hitting the fan, and you got to get out right of peanut butter and chocolate hitting the fan, probably not a good idea to stay in the city and gunfight as somebody that's been a professional gunfighter in cities. It's not a real great long-term strategy to expect to get in a gunfight every day. Probably want to get out. And in this case, you may want to go smaller, you may want to go lighter. Some on the platform, but you only really are probably going to carry one long gun. More so on the ammo. And this is why a lot of prepper and survivalists pick the 22 long rifle. And I just did a whole episode on, a quest to replace and this is not my one go-to long gun. It is not. And I'm not going to say what that is on this episode to get sidetracked. But it's a lot of people's, the peanut butter and chocolate has hit the fan. They pick a 22 because they can carry so much ammo. To illustrate the point, I've said it before, but I'm not telling you this should be your survival plan, right? I could throw on a pair of Crocs, camo, of course, because it's the apocalypse, a pair of old surplus woodland camo pants, grab a 10-22 rifle, and in just my cargo pants, I could probably carry 1,000 rounds of ammo. Shirtless, running into the apocalypse, like some post-apocalyptic action hero. Reese's boy, right? Because peanut butter and chocolate has hit the fan. I could do that in pants with no pack, no nothing, right? You're not carrying 1,000 rounds of really anything else and being mobile on foot. Just to illustrate a point. I'm not telling you to do that. That illustrates a point. Even 223, which is fairly light, you're probably not carrying 1,000 rounds of that on your back, plus all the other kit that you probably should have. Because you're going to need water, right? Water's heavy. Just one small thing. So you get the idea. So for that reason, and everything you should have, and hopefully you can leave in a vehicle, but if you don't leave right away, and it's better to leave a year too early than a second too late. If you can't get out in a vehicle, because you know what traffic's like sometimes on a good day in a big city. I sure do. Now, if there's one or two accidents, now imagine everybody in that city is trying to leave. And there's a ton of accidents. And those cars run out of gas eventually. And leaving in a vehicle is untenable to you. So you should plan on it being a man-portable system at some point. Right? And if that's the case, you might make the case for moving down. In this case, something like a 10-22 takedown or some other kind of 22 long rifle. You could do handgun and rifle, both in the same caliber. We're sticking with rifles. This is already going to be a long episode. You move down to that, and you have that, and you can move with that amount of ammo. If you consider that wherever you're leaving, and this is not a good plan, but wherever you're going, you don't really have any infrastructure. You don't have a cache of thousands of rounds there, so that ammo is going to have to last you a long time. You can make the real case for moving down in an urban survival rifle to that. Again, not saying it's as good as an M4. It's certainly not. I'm not saying it's as good for fighting. I'm not saying it's as lethal round per round. But what I'm saying is that it is an option, and it's an option that people talk about a lot because of that advantage, and that's a big one. Also, very light. 22 Magnum. It has a better power to weight ratio because you pretty much have the same weight projectiles, but you have more powder and more brass. But that slightly longer brass and the more powder don't weigh that much. So if you're looking at power to weight ratio, it's a gem. The issue is there are not nearly as many reliable, affordable semi-autos in it. There's just an issue because it's such a long, straight round. One thing that illustrates this pretty clearly is that Ruger 1022 is a legendary, probably the most popular 22 rifle by far that is produced right now. They briefly made a 22 Magnum and they stopped. There is, I'm aware of one semi-automatic 22 Magnum, but there aren't a lot, and a lot of that has to do with the feed geometry of the round, which I'm not going to get into, but it's got a high power to weight ratio, so you may look at it. Oh, actually, there are more than one. The Kel-Tec, I was thinking of the Savage, which is not probably what I would pick for this. It's more tailor-made for hunting. But also the Kel-Tec CMR-30, which is, you probably are aware of their high-capacity 22 Magnum handgun. They have a carbine that's the same, but again, I don't know that it's super reliable. I would take a very reliable 22 long rifle, like a 1022, over a maybe reliable sometimes if I load the magazine correctly and jump on one foot, 22 Magnum. So the round itself is good, but the lack of support for it is kind of an issue in this kind of world. The other one that fits into this, and you could maybe carry 1,000 rounds of this, and not that I'm not saying you need to carry 1,000 rounds in your bug out kit. That's not what I'm saying. But another one with a really high power to weight ratio is the 5.7. This is intriguing as an urban survival rifle. It's got more gumption, it's got more foot-pounds if we're talking about math, and that doesn't always equate to effectiveness, but it's got more foot-pounds. The 5.7. Also, it has the benefit of being center-fired, which in general is going to be much more reliable. Even if the guns themselves are both equally reliable, the rounds, that center-fire round is going to be more reliable in general than the vast majority of rim-fire rounds. So the 5.7, you got a high power-to-weight ratio. Most of that extra weight is coming in the form, or most of that extra cartridge, because it's bigger, but a lot of that is powder and really thin, small brass. So you get a pretty high power-to-weight ratio. I'm not sure if it's higher than the 22 Magnum, but it's certainly a higher power-to-weight ratio than the 22 long rifle, I think. And it's reliable, and there's some really cool guns that come in it. You talk about a cool, I'm not saying best, but a really cool option that's light and handy, and the ammo is light and handy, is the, even though it's well over, 30 years old at this point, still futuristic looking, P90 or PS90. Now the cool one is the Select Fire, which we probably can't have, and the really short subcompact version, which you can have if you want to do the tack stamp, but just the regular 16-inch version, since it's a bullpup, that's an intriguing option. It's light, it's handy. Also, CMMG makes the Banshee, which is a really cool radial delayed blowback system. going to be made to really high quality. And that, again, if we're talking about lightweight, you want to go down. You want to scale down in size. The 5.7. Issues with this is ammo is much harder to get anytime. You go to a pretty big gun store, they're probably going to have some. But you go to a lot of smaller stores, even good times, even way left of event, it's not the easiest round to find. So there's that. It's also expensive. So you're paying probably as much or more round per round for 5.7 than you would for 223 or 5.56. So you're paying more for a less powerful round. Kind of my same issue with 380. You're paying more for a less powerful round than 9mm. But not to get off topic there. But if you're moving down in size, you might really look at, I'm not completely ruling out the 22 Magnum, but you might really look at the 22 long rifle or the 5.7. And those aren't the only two guns, but the CMMG Banshee is a pretty cool gun, and the P90 is a really cool gun. So those are some pretty intriguing urban survival rifles. Now let's talk about the PCC. If you're talking about the more modern uber tactical, you got quad rails and M-LOK, and it looks like an AR, but it fires 9mm. Here's my thing with this. And PCCs are a lot of fun. But why wouldn't you just go with the original aforementioned M4? If you look at it being man-portable and power-to-weight ratio, your power-to-weight ratio is not cool on that compared to 5.56. Rounds may be smaller, but most of the weight of a round is in the projectile because it's usually lead coated in copper. There are exceptions like monolithic bullets, but let's stay on topic here. That's the heaviest part of the round. Your average 5.56 round is between 55 and 62 grain. There are outliers, I get it, but you get the idea. And the common projectiles in 9mm range from 155 to 147 grain. And you look at it, and you look at the size and weight of the rifles, and the fact that not all of them, some really high-end ones, like we talked about the CMMG Banshee, they also make it in pistol calibers, or the, I do really, really like for the intended application, the HK MP5. But if you look at standard blowback guns, which a lot of the cheaper ones are just straight blowback, like they look like an AR, but they've just been converted and they just use a straight blowback system. If you actually shoot those, the recoil can be no less or sometimes even more, just because you have more mass slamming back and forth than a 5.56 gun, and it's about the same weight, and the ammo weighs as much or more. So you really got to give me a compelling reason as to why you wouldn't go with an M4. And perhaps that's legislation. Perhaps you really want a long gun and a handgun in the same caliber, which is not, it's not nothing. That's not a zero-sum gain. But I would say the fact of having the much more effective round per round, higher power to weight ratio, and the much more adequate point blank range of a 5.56. Let's just say if I had other options, I would, and if I was getting ready for this left of event, I would certainly gear more towards the classic M4 than I would a PCC in almost any conceivable circumstance. Let's talk about moving up in urban survival rifles. This will make some people very happy, even one of the patrons very happy. He's a big fan of this round. You want to move up from 5.56. As we talked about moving down, if we use the M4 5.56 as a standard, what about moving up? The big one here is 300 Blackout. 300 Blackout, I consider a niche round. I do not consider a general purpose round. I consider it a niche round. But if you're looking for a niche, urban survival might be one of its niches. If you want a much shorter gun, if you're talking about going shorter than the 16-inch and going to what is now kosher again, the pistol brace version, it has an advantage over shorter barreled 5.56s in that as a percentage, you don't tend to lose as much velocity when you start chopping inches off a barrel. I'm still not saying it's a better option in a AR pistol in 300 Blackout than 5.56, but I'm saying it is that is a benefit. If you start chopping barrel length, you do retain a higher percentage of that velocity. Also, the subsonic thing. If you want to go through all the thing of getting the suppressor and running the suppressor, it can be quieter. And I'm either going to have to speed up here, or I'm going to have to make this a two-parter. So let's make this a two-parter, because I don't want to just halfway do it. I'd rather do it as a two-parter. I had no idea just how in-depth this was going to be. In the next part, I would like to talk about the bigger calibers, like bigger and more powerful than 300 Blackout. Also, manually operated guns. We briefly talked about the SKS, but there's a lot more malum prohibitum stuff, like what if you can't have? Or where do scout rifles fit in? Or a place we talked about the uber modern PCCs, but what about something like a lever action 357? We'll, I think, explore that in part 2. So, part 1 of Urban Survival Rifles. Let's start wrapping it up. Instead of making one really long episode, I'll make 2 shorter episodes. Tactical tip of the day. Where does one go to get his apocalyptic prepping supplies? Some secret black market bunker? How about Hobby Lobby or Michael's Art Supply for some of it? One of the things you might want, and not that there's anything wrong with cleaning with paper towels or the stronger bluer shop towels, but for gun maintenance or some other maintenance like polishing leather shoes or something, they sell sheets of felt that are real cheap. Like last time I bought them, and you can cut those big sheets of felt into little patches for gun cleaning, for applying Renaissance wax or Ballistol, or treating your leather shoes to weather the apocalypse. And not that a paper towel won't work, but these are better, and they're super cheap, and they absorb a lot more. So that's your easy tactical tip. If maybe next time your wife drags you into Hobby Lobby or Michael's Art Supply or whatever, you're just in there anyway because you're an artistic apocalyptic guy. Those work really well for that. That's your tactical tip of the day. Your tactical verse of the day. For not one of us lives for himself, and not one dies for himself. For if we live for the Lord. Or if we die for the Lord. Therefore, whether we live or die, we are the Lord's. What a great verse for urban survival, right? Whether you die today or tomorrow, or sally forth through the apocalypse, living or dying is not what's most important. What's most important is your eternal life. Where are you going to spend it? Live for the Lord, because the Lord Jesus Christ died for you. Thanks for listening. Have a blessed day.